Good morning to all. The Embassy of Colombia in Singapore and the National University of Singapore jointly welcome you to our event, A Window to Colombia, the Humpback Whales. My name is Diana Pimentel, and I will be co-hosting with Professor Darren of the Chian Natural History Museum. Today, we will have a presentation on a species that is very dear to the country of Colombia, the beloved humpback whales. Through this event, we hope to provide a window into the lives of these magnificent creatures and introduce a dialogue to introduce their role in the efforts to understand climate change. Before I introduce the speakers, we would just like to share a few notes. One, our audience will not be able to unmute themselves throughout the presentation to facilitate a smooth flow. And two, if you have any questions for our panel, please submit them in our Q&A section. Okay, so allow me to introduce the speakers and guest panelists who will be chairing the event. First, we welcome Ambassador of the Republic of Colombia, Manuel Solano. Ms Angela Posada, our featured Colombian expert speaker, scientific writer and journalist, and author of the acclaimed In the Heart of the Whales. Mr. Marcus Chua, mammal researcher from the Chian Natural History Museum. Professor Peter Ng, director of the Chian Natural History Museum. Dr. Liu Thai-Ker, founding chairman of Morrow and recognized as the architect of modern Singapore. Thank you all for joining us today. So the agenda will be as follows. First, we will hear a few words by Ambassador Manuel Solano, followed by an introduction and presentation by Ms Angela Posada. Then Mr. Marcus Chua will share some of his recent research work with us, followed by commentary from our panelists, Professor Ng and Dr. Liu, which will then bring us to the Q&A section of our event, where we will be receiving questions from our audience that they may want to ask our panel before closing. So please do not forget to submit your questions for our speakers to address at the end. Without further ado, we will now hear a few words from Ambassador Manuel Solano. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to this window to Colombia. First of all, I have to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Colombia, Cultural Directorate, and also Ms. Polly Turner, the director of this gallery, the Architect, to allow to stay here in this wonderful place. In the same team, thank you, Dr. Liu Thai-Ker, Professor, and in the museum to Marcus Chua, in Colombia, Angela Posada, thank you very much for help us to make reality this project that we are working for more than 1 year. Angela Posada will present us with her personal experience from an expedition where she closely followed the humpback whale journey through the world. Our Singaporean friends and experts will support by presenting their own research and findings and how we can all participate in the preservation of these magnificent mammals. This project, this idea, started in 2018 when I have the invitation of the museum. And we could see this whale that you are watching, and also it catch my attention because the whales also catch the attention of the humans. And also 2 months later, I went to Colombia with Dr. Liu Thai-Ker, and we have a wonderful trip to Buenaventura. Buenaventura is our city in the Pacific Ocean. We have the chance in the month of July, we are in the harbor, and we listen of strange sounds, magic sounds, and we catch our attention. You remember Dr. Liu Thai-Ker, and I say, okay, tomorrow I want to show you the whales because of the whales. But we didn't realize that it's a little far, so we couldn't say, I promise Dr. Liu Thai-Ker next year. So this year, I didn't think how it's going to happen. We are going to come back and to see the whales and like this to introduce with another groups of scientific people, important Singaporeans, this part of Colombia. We couldn't. This is the window that express and share with you the ways and this special momentum. We are going to see two special momentums: how the waves come to this world, how they birth, and how they die. I think these topics that in some way, thank you very much. I hope we can participate actively in this activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Before I give the floor to our dear Colombian journalist and author, Ms Angela Posada, I would like to give a few words concerning her work. She is a Miami-based Colombian American scientific and environmental journalist with 30 years of experience as a storyteller in both the Spanish and English language. She was the first Hispanic MIT Knight Fellow in Science Journalism. She is the author of a collection of 8 science and adventure books for young adults read in schools in China and Latin America. She is the winner of Premio Simón Bolívar, Colombia's top journalism award. She has an Emmy nomination for script writing and has won the first prize for investigative environmental journalism from the Society of Professional Journalists. She works with several international Antarctic programs and is a recipient of the United States Antarctic Service Medal. She has joined several international oceanography and land research expeditions as a science writer, and she now divides her time between Colombia and the United States. Ms. Posada, you now have the floor.
Dennis, thank you very much, Diana. Good morning to everybody in Singapore. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you to Professor Eng and to our very nice guests at the museum. Yeah, I mean, I've been very honored to join you guys this morning in conversation about the whales, and I'm going to share with you just a short presentation of a few, let me see where it is. Here it is. Where is it? A few photos about the whales, because as you can see in this wonderful map drawn by a dear friend, whales really can be, as I like to call them, silver threads of friendship and cooperation between nations. I mean, they really glide, you know, like wonderful clouds of flesh under the oceans, and they are incredibly important for telling us what's going on in our seas, and also for really calling the attention to us humans to get together to do something about it, which is why I am so happy that I can talk through the embassy to somehow bring Singapore and Colombia closer in one more area, which is the area of the whales. And as you can notice, there is a beautiful sperm whale here. Well, I like to think it was a bigger version of Jubilee that somehow landed inside the Singapore map, which I love that. I learned about Jubilee recently, which I'm really going to be very happy to hear more about her. And I think it's really amazing that some peoples of the world have opportunities to see whales, and they don't really, many times they don't really are thankful enough for this miracle that it is to watch a whale. So I'm going to share with you a couple of experiences that we have in Colombia studying the whales. Let me see if you can see this. My first experience with them was on board this submarine. In Colombia, it is one of 3 submarines that the Navy has, and it's beautiful because the Navy helps a lot in science research, and some people don't actually realize up to what point. So I participated with this very famous in Colombia electrical engineer. His name is Dr. Jorge Reynolds, and he co-invented the external pacemaker. His whole career has been geared to studying how a heart works from the electrical standpoint. So he studies from the tiny hearts of the mosquitoes to the big hearts of the whale, and wants to know what can we learn from the largest heart in the world to apply to our own hearts when they are broken. So Jorge invited me to one of his very interesting underwater acoustic research cruise to study the heart of the whales. That was a long time ago. It was back in the 90s, early 2000s. And it was an amazing experience because we left Cartagena in the Atlantic coast of Colombia. We crossed the Panama Canal, and then we were just navigating through the Pacific, which is right where the whales come to give birth and to procreate. And at some point, we were around what, like 30 meters deep, only 40 meters deep, and then the whales began to sing. And you can't, I cannot really express my wonder as you see, you are in this metal, inside this metal tube, and the sailor who was working the sonar suddenly opened up the channels in such a way that we could hear what we thought it was a male whale, and we could see him on the sonar also. We could see the shadow right on top next to us, no? And it began to sing. And at some point, the captain of the submarine, you know, this rugged sailor, just looked at me and his eyes were filled with tears. He said, Angela, just put your hand on the wall of the submarine. And I did, and I could feel the metallic wall of the submarines vibrating with this song. I mean, we were effectively immersed in a love poem of this male whale singing, hopefully to who knows how many females out there. So that was beautiful. And what Dr. Reynolds did is that he recorded these songs, and then with software applications that he created in his lab, he removed that singing that was masking what he really wanted to hear, which was the movement of this gigantic heart pumping 700 liters of blood each time, boom. So every time it went boom, it was like an explosion. And then, of course, that also was tied to an EKG. He also does EKGs. He used to put satellite tags with EKGs so he could actually follow them and follow what happened with their heart as they were submerging. So in brief, what he did is that he gave all this knowledge away to the scientific community with the idea of continued studies on the electrical activity of the heart of the whale. So that was just an amazing research that he did. To my knowledge, that hasn't really been done anywhere else. Again, that was quite a while ago, but the repository of information is there. So that was one experience. The next one is one that is quite amazing, and that I really invite people in Singapore researchers to think about the possibility of collaborating with the Colombian Antarctic program. We began sailing down to Antarctica in 2014 with this wonderful vessel called the 20 de Julio, that means 20th of July, which is the national date in Colombia. Now we have another new vessel, and we are building yet another one specifically made to go to polar waters. But this one was beautiful because it is a vessel that was made to patrol the tropics. And suddenly it became an Antarctic ship with helicopter and everything. And what Colombia is doing is to really understand what happens in between here as you leave Cartagena, cross the Panama Canal and begin sailing down, we needed to understand how the Antarctic continent is affecting the tropics. Because that's the thing. Antarctica is really affecting the tropics more than anybody thought, faster than anybody thought, and even interestingly enough, almost more than you could see effects in polar waters. So the whales that are born here let me see, every summer, every October and November in front, as you can see, look at the palm trees in front of the Pacific coast of Colombia, where I dearly hope that we can all go together sometime. This is also a beautiful touristic destination, and you can get very close to see the whales. So with researchers, we just get close to them and we get little pieces of skin sometimes, or pieces of grease or skin that they leave in the water too. And then we follow them all the way through, which is interesting because a lot of the people who study whales normally follow them halfway. I mean, you have a lot of researchers who begin in Peru or Ecuador or Chile, but really to begin following that migration, doing oceanographic stations, measuring the nutrient amount the amount of nutrients in the water, or the amount of light in the water, light penetration. All this is important to know what's going on with the whales, because they are indicators of the good state or bad state of the oceans. And here, this beautiful whale it arrived to Antarctica, and this was actually this is a photo by the United States Antarctic Program, with whom I did a couple of cruises. So it's really interesting what happens with these migrations. Here, these are the satellite tags of two of our beloved little whales, because it was the first time that we put any satellite tags to them. I mean, by we, I mean the researchers. I just tagged along with them. So their name are Uramba, which is the name of one of the bays here in the Pacific coast of Colombia, and Negrita, which means little black one. And so mom and daughter just migrated. You can see this long trip that they took, and then they got to the end of Latin America, of South America, and they continued around the Drake Strait, and they were just swimming along here and eating, because that's what they do when they get here, they eat. They travel all this time. 11,000 kilometers is the second largest migration in the animal kingdom. And it is just amazing, not just the idea of it, but what it means, because again, whales are indicators of the state of health of the ocean. So when I was there, I've been in two cruises with the Colombian Antarctic Program. The first one was in 2014-15, when we began our cruises, and then this was their third cruise. I went with them, and what was really interesting is that while during the first expedition we noticed a lot of krill, there were clouds and clouds and clouds of krill making the ocean red. It was amazing. So of course the whales eat krill like the tons, but then that year we couldn't see krill. I mean, where was it? I kept asking in every station, in every research station that we stopped. I asked them, have you guys seen krill? We haven't. We don't know if it was deeper or farther away, or it hadn't arrived yet. The bottom line is that instead of krill, we saw a lot of these thingies they call salps. And salps are these kind of tunicates. They're kind of transparent. And I don't know, they look to me, they look kind of boring to eat. I don't know if whales ate them or not. We actually couldn't see them eating, but they were all around the whales. So I guess whales eventually might become opportunistic. The point is that it is interesting because people are asking themselves, biologists are asking themselves, is that what whales are eating now, or what happens? But the thing is that these salps don't belong in Antarctica. These salps belong in hotter water, warmer waters. So they are an indicator of something going on. And the other indicator is the mercury accumulation on the skin of the whales that we see it in front of the Pacific coast of Colombia. Samples of the skin are taken, and yes, they some of them have mercury, but however, when they get to Antarctica, they seem to have more. So what's going on there? Is it an accumulation? Is it in their milks? What, you know, so that's just part of what the research in Colombia is all about these days in relation with the whales and Antarctica. So, you know, pretty much in closing, just before we just sit down and chat, for me, is this thing of using Antarctica as a whiteboard to collaborate among nations to do something about this planet. The whales are just you know, the top of the apex. Let's find ways for our nations to work together. These Mexican researchers are very interesting because they study ways to calibrate the NASA satellites that read the amount of chlorophyll and nutrients in the water. The satellites are good, but if they don't have studies directly done on the ocean to calibrate them, they're good for nothing. So these guys go all around the world calibrating what the satellites see. And then, of course, I was particularly proud myself of the role I was able to play, because I had been, as an American and Colombian citizen, invited by the United States government to spend a few months in their research station. This is Palmer Station. This is where this picture was taken. This is the director of Palmer, Dr. Bob Farrell. And I just simply asked him, you know, Dr. Farrell, can I just take a big vessel from the Colombian Navy research Antarctic ship and park it in front of your station, and we can all get down and say hi? And it was lovely, because the first thing we saw was this, which really brought tears to my eyes. You know, see the flags of our countries flying in Antarctica for me is great, because that continent, just as the rest of the ocean, is a vessel of cooperation. It can be, it better be. So that was really lovely. And then, as part of these efforts, let me see if I can just move this. This is just something I wanted to share with you. It's a book that I am writing in collaboration with two friends. One is an artist, and the other one is wonderful with everything that is integrating storytelling online with video and audio. And so we're still working on it. We want to present it next year. A book that talks about a lot of the science, but in really beautiful, poetic, without diminishing the rigor of science, about the secret lives of whales. So much we don't know about whales yet, and we need to know. We're going to have audio, video. We're going to have it's pretty much devoted to all sorts of audiences, but with a little emphasis on a little bit of younger audiences, you know, just pre-teens, teens, because we really think that using the whales as a vehicle to promote conservation and solidarity and international cooperation. And this is why I really one day would love to see the book, which is initially online, but eventually we'll see what happens, somewhere in the museum in Singapore. But that's one thing. The other thing that I'm really, sorry, that's not it. It was the last one. Oh, where is it? Here. This is something beautiful that I think, let me see what you guys can see that. Okay. No, but what am I doing? You see, well, okay. Pacificanto here is something that perhaps we can do one day in Singapore. It was back in 2000s with Dr. Reynolds. Remember the guy who studies the heart of the whale? He decided to put some hydrophones right there, just underwater microphones with connected to satellites. to record the singing of the whales, so that this it's very symbolic, because these songs were being streamed live to a satellite. Now we wouldn't need that. We would just need internet. Back inside a buried salt mine. And there was this mezzo soprano singing, and it was just a riot, because of course we depended on the whales. No, if they don't want to sing, oh boy. But if they sing, and we had a concert, people sitting there inside this salt mine waiting for the whales, and when they began to sing, it was just ridiculous. So wow, wouldn't that be beautiful to do that kind of thing? I don't know how easy it is these days to. I guess it should be easier to put a hydrophone and to transmit that signal. But in the end, it's all about that. No, it's all about loving the whales, and using that knowledge and that love to come together to do more research and more conservation, and more what science diplomacy, or at least good good friendship between nations. So that's that as far as my presentation. Let me stop putting it, and anyhow, maybe one day we'll all be working, or celebrating the whales together.
Thank you, Angela, for your wonderful presentation. You have certainly uplifted our appreciation of these mammals, especially tracking all of their travels around the world. And I'd also like to note that you pointed out the matter of cooperation between countries in order to preserve these creatures, not only the whales, but even what they're feeding on, what's happening in the Antarctica. But this is definitely a matter that many countries can come together to address, such as the climate change that you addressed. So thank you very much for sharing your wonderful research and expedition with us.
Thank you.
We will now turn to our MC co-host, Professor Darren Yo. Darren?
Thanks, Diana. And thank you, Angela, for the very nice talk. Really enjoyed it. So what I'm going to do now is just very briefly introduce our museum officer and lecturer, Mr. Marcus Chua. So Marcus is our mammal researcher in the museum, and he was involved in the team that was responsible for bringing that whale skeleton that's behind him now into our museum, and they've also been conducting some research on it. So I won't waste much time. Let Marcus take over, please. Go ahead, Marcus.
Hey, good morning, Ambassador Solano, the panelists, Angela, and everyone. That was a really interesting talk, and thanks, Darren, for the introduction. Today, I would like to, my name is Marcus, and I would like to share about the whale that's behind me, how she came to be at the museum. Right, so the salvage, the research, and the outreach and education program surrounding the sperm whale. So the story started in July 2015 when we just moved to our new premises. We have over 1 million specimens moved, and we thought that, all right, that's right, after the grand opening, we can put our head down, relax for a bit after moving for more than a year. But that was not to be, because on 10 July 2015, a volunteer called me up in the morning saying that someone put up a picture of a floating whale on Facebook, and what we should do about it. At that point of time, we had very little information, and so what can we do about it? I burst into the meeting room where my boss, Prof. Peter, was in, and said, there's a whale out there, and do we want it, and what should we do about it? So Singapore has extremely busy shipping lanes. So one of the things that the Maritime Port Authority of Singapore does is to, if they find a whale or anything blocking the shipping lane, is to immediately sink it. So what we said was we immediately contacted them and said, there's a whale out there. We're interested in it. So if you see one, let us know. So immediately they dispatched a patrol out and informed everyone to be on the lookout for the whale. And at the same time, we worked with ACRES and Wildlife Rescue NGO, and they were the first ones that sent us a good photo of a whale from public reports on the ground. And so we saw that there was a whale out there. It was a large whale, and there are two things. If the whale was still alive, it definitely needs help. And if the whale was dead, we definitely are interested in it for science and for education. So immediately, we got a small team assembled and we discussed what we should do about it. And at the same time, the Maritime Authority of Singapore contacted us and say that they sighted the whale and where was it and what we should do about it. So we got a group together, and we boarded an MPA boat, and together with a journalist, we got to see the whale, and when we saw it, this is what we saw. Right. So it was a large sperm whale, a female, and with that in mind, we thought, wow, this is the largest animal we're going to plan to salvage, and what we should do about it. So recall that we just opened in April that year, and one of our guests at our opening was Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan. At that time, he was the Minister of the National of the Environment, right? Newer, and so he's familiar with what the museum does. And he was really one of the person that pulled out all stops and gave blessings of the national agency to help secure the whale. So with that, when the whale was floating off Jurong Island, and one of the things that we had to do was to secure the carcass, and we wanted to do the processing at the NEA plant in the western side of the island at Tuas. And so the whale was towed all the way there and for processing over the next 70 days, right? So it was, but once we got there, it took about 5 hours to get to Tuas. We had to haul it out of the water. So we just finished constructing the museum. So my colleagues had access and contacts of a lorry crane. So we used that to hoist the whale out of the water. And once that happened, immediately samples were collected by a curator, my colleagues. And this was critical because things degrade very quickly. So we need to get fresh samples from the whale skin, muscle tissues as well. And it was already by about 10 p.m. at night. So we had to quickly decide what we want to do. So this is the largest animal that I've ever salvaged. And we had very little expertise in dealing with an animal of that size. So I contacted several whale experts around the world and what we should do to secure a carcass like this. So how to preserve a whale? There are many steps to be done. And in Singapore, we've got very little space. So one of the first steps was to deflesh a whale. Most museums would bury a whale underground and let it decompose, but we don't have the time nor the space for that. So we deflesh the whale manually by hand. After that, the bones had to be labeled. Bones had to be boiled down to remove the grease, bleach it, and then get rid of pests by using borax solution. And that is eventually the carcass, the skeleton will be ready for expansion that way. Right. So 5 of us. So this is a photo that's way ahead of its time because this is a pandemic-safe photo. We don masks, PPE, and really cut down the whale down using stick knives as recommended by experts. And one of the challenges we faced was 12 cm thick blubber. We had to remove this in order to get to the flesh and eventually to the skeleton. Right? It was a race against time because there was decomposition taking place at the same time. So what we really wanted to get was to the stomach contents because that could tell us what the whale ate before she passed away. So that could that be a cause of the reason of the death? Right. So eventually we got the stomach contents up for diet study, which I'll get to in a bit. And the thing about museums is that we are very obsessed about labeling, and that has served us well because every single bone on the whale was labeled so that we could piece the skeleton back together again. Right? So including fine details like the hand bones, this is a flipper bone. We don't want to lose any of the bones, and we want to keep intact the sequences of the bones. So our senior curator, Kate on the left, who is fine arts graduate, did a much better job at me in putting the bones together. Right. So, but that did a job still. Next, the defleshing of the whale, the processing of the carcass also served as a necropsy. And that led us to pretty grim finding because when we found the whale, she was bleeding from a wound on the back of her back. And when we got down to her vertebrae, we found that one of her vertebrae was completely shattered into 2 or 3 pieces, and some parts were missing. So there we inferred or concluded that this was a very blunt trauma that was probably a result of ship strike that resulted in her death. right? During the same time as we were processing the carcass day by day, we updated social media, and we received massive public interest as well as a media buzz. And Dr. William Balakrishnan helped amplify some of this, and this resulted in a lot of interest in the whale as well. And so much so that the whale received fan art depicting probably her death. Right. So we would just in the mini museum, we sort of resource low. So we thought, how would we want to mount an exhibition of that the whale deserved? So a fundraising drive was mounted. We engaged the public. We engaged media. We went on TV. We spoke about it at length, and we were glad and so heartened that the public responded, and we raised over 1.3 million for the exhibition, as well as the outreach events that would go around her. Right. Eventually, after 70 days of processing, the carcass was ready to be moved back to the museum. And while that was happening, the specialized exhibit team, as well as contractors, were commissioned to do the whale for exhibition. Right. And while that was happening, there was finally time to do some science. And some of the objectives we wanted to do was to determine what the whale ate before she died, the proportion to the prey species, study her DNA to find out which population she probably came from as well. So we kept about 80% of the stomach contents, and we identified them with the help of scientists. And we found that there were over 1,800 cephalopod beaks. So these were the mouth parts of squid and octopus that were left behind in the stomach contents. 7% of the diet was squids between 12 cm to a foot in size, and they range from 60 grams to over 5 kilograms in weight. And they also include fishes and salps. So Angela talked about salps that were eaten by the whales in Antarctica. So at the bottom left of the image, you see a pyrosome, which is a relative of salp. And this was found inside the sperm whale as well. Right? But there was also another grim finding that not only there were there food inside the stomach of the whales, but plastics were found in her as well. Although that did not result in her death, but it showed that the state of the oceans around the world today. Right? From the DNA, we amplified the skin DNA, and we found that her DNA corresponded with haplotype A, which is the most common haplotype found around the world. So that was not very informative, but it was present in all oceans. It was most common in Japan as well as in parts of the Indian Ocean, but it was absent of Sri Lanka. Right? It was also the first time that this DNA type was recorded in Southeast Asia. Right? We also wanted to find out where did she die before floating to Singapore. So with that, we used colleagues from the National Marine Institute in Singapore, created a model that basically simulated water flow of Singapore. And so this is how it looks like. We simulated spots and see how it floated off Singapore a few days before 10 July. And so the best models inferred that she probably had an eastward drift from the Straits of Malacca to Singapore in the preceding few days. Right? So putting all this information together suggests that the whale probably came from the population of Cocos-Keeling Island or Indonesia, which shows that how interconnected the sea really is. And it provides a context for future sperm whale studies around the region. But this is not the endpoint. We collected a lot of samples, and we could do assessment for pollutants in her blubber as well. So because a lot of this work is, a lot of the funds that was contributed from the public, we decided to make it an open access publication. So you could scan your QR code and you can read the paper to find out more about the sperm whale. So throughout every step of the salvage process as well as the research, we thought about how we could optimize it for communicating science as well as the whale to the public as well. So there was a lot of social media posts, there was public talks. My colleagues Kate as well as Eva also published a book documenting the process. You can get this in the museum. As well as finally the exhibition, we leveraged it for outreach and education as well, especially about the threats of plastic pollution, ship strike, as well as other threats such as whaling in the past. Right? And I think the Singapore Sperm Whale has really inspired the public. They have posted and amplified the message on social media about threats that she faced, marine stewardship. Some people are just inspired, and some people just really love the whales, like my dream pet. Some people posted. Right, so we hope that she continues to live on in our gallery, right? And it so happened that this whale was found in Singapore's 50th year of independence, the Jubilee year. So some people have nicknamed her Jubilee. And people continue to visit the whale, and lots of education programs around the whale has been created. So hope this continues to endure. And of course, we have lots of people to thank, especially the Colombian Embassy for giving us the platform to talk about the whale today, the NEA, the MPA, as well as donors and people who have come in contact with the whale. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Marcus. All right, so yeah, thanks for that. A quick reminder to our audience, do remember to write down your questions in the Q&A section for our two speakers and also for our panelists. And while you're doing that, I'm going to open the floor to our panelists, Prof. Peter Ng and Dr. Liu Thai-Ker, to share with us some insights that they might have from presentations today. Over to you.
Well, I must say I'm basically a land person, not a sea person. So today it was really a very fascinating journey for me to go into the ocean. And I really don't have very much to say about it. I just want to make two things. And that is, as a city planner, and particularly with the strong support of Singapore government, we plan the city well, and second, we take good care of the infrastructure, and we took good care of the natural environment. So in Singapore today, our seawater is basically clean, unpolluted, and the corals are still thriving in good health, except for the fact that the seawater temperature is rising and the coral is showing signs of suffering. But that's really more global warming issue rather than the poor pollution control. Just want to say that one thing. And the second thing I want to say that since this is a Colombian event, I want to say that I have been to Colombia twice, partly because when I was a chairman of the Center for Livable City, I was party to the committee giving Lee Kuan Yew World City Award, and 1 year the award was given to Medellin, and so I had to go to Medellin to understand the city, and then 2 years later I went there for a World City Mayors Summit, and that was held in Medellin. So, but in the process of doing that, I must say I loved Colombia. In Bogota, one of the things, among the many beautiful buildings, one of the things that impressed me was that it's home for Botero. And as a young man, I already had great admiration for Botero. And in the major public square, I saw his sculpture, and that was really very memorable experience. And Medellin actually well deserved to be a World City, get a Lee Kuan Yew World City Award because despite the very challenging terrain, and yet the city solved the problem of transportation, housing, and environment very well, and also over a period of, I understand, 25 years, with the succession of mayors and so on, all of them uh, stuck to the same objective to make the city a better city. That's very unusual because in many cities, when they change a mayor, they change the direction of urban development. But in Medellin, they stuck to the same direction and turned the city into award-winning city. The final thing I want to say that I also had the privilege to go to Cali and went to the Buenaventura, and as you know, we was trying to go there to see the whales, but it wasn't the right day to see. But Buenaventura itself, obviously, it's a very beautiful place, a beautiful seas, islands, and the city itself, of course, needs a little bit of fixing, but even as it is, it's very charming. And that's all I want to just to speak to you. Thank you very much.
I've not been to Colombia. So yes, okay, the ambassador, yes. I am not a whale expert, but there's one thing about whales which excites people because we see them as our equivalents in the sea, a sentient being that we have done rather not so nice things to over the last 100, 200 years. The good news, of course, is that in the last 20, 30 years, we have been doing much better. We're trying very hard to keep them healthy, thriving, and I like Angela's talk very much because people talk about why you want to conserve whales, you know, they're so far away and so on. But I think the message to be sent is that if the whales die, two things are boding for us. One, we have become really awful custodians of the planet. We can't take care of the whales, and how can we take care of ourselves? Secondly, if the oceans are in a mess and the whales have to die because of that, then we are also condemning ourselves to our own bad fate. The symbolism of the whales is not lost on me, even though I don't work on them. And the sheer size, and I've heard those songs, they're mesmerizing. It cuts into your soul, even if you don't have one. And it is a feeling that's most unusual. The Singapore whale, the Colombian whales, I think in that sense, they provide a certain complementarity to our two countries. And the ambassador, together with researchers in Singapore, we are trying to find some common ground where we can bring our interests together and find that synergy that despite the fact that we are worlds apart, or very far apart, right? I think we share the same interests, share the same concerns, and as this morning's talks has also shown, there are even some very big shared interests. So hopefully one day maybe, Angela, we can invite you down to Singapore, or we send our young mammal researchers to Colombia to sit down to have coffee with you. And then the two of you, all of you, can perhaps try to change the world and make it into a better place. We hope. Thank you very much.
Bye. Lovely words from both of you.
So thanks to our panelists for their thoughts on the presentations. We're going to do a short Q&A session now. There are several questions, so I'm going to read out the questions or sort of combine some of the questions that are similar. I think this first question probably more to Angela and Marcus. We have a question that asks, which do you think is more harmful to the whale populations, plastic pollution or global warming? You know, which do you think is harms the whale populations more? And I'm just combining that with another question: is boat collision a frequent occurrence, and is it a serious threat? So basically, it's a question about threats: plastic pollution, global warming, and boat collisions. Angela, you have
Sure. The question is fantastic. Yeah, that's a triplet of enemies right there. I don't know, Marcus. What do you say? I am inclined to think that global warming is like the big umbrella, like the big shadow, like this big thing that is we see happening, but we don't quite yet understand it exactly. So that is the biggest threat. But the biggest threat in the shorter term, perhaps, is the plastic pollution. Well, of course, the boat collisions, yeah, but the plastic pollution because it's more insidious, it's more spread. I mean, I mean, my God, we found microplastics buried in the ice in Antarctica. Hell, I mean, come on. I mean, so yes, microplastics are everywhere, uh, but I still think global warming is the biggest threat. What do you say, Marcus?
I agree with Angela. So both are extremely chronic problems, and they're getting the impact accumulates, especially for plastic. So I think sperm whales was only recorded. Plastic is only recorded in sperm whales starting from the 1970s. That's when the first record, and then slowly more and more and more have been recorded in whales. And well, it causes like small problems such as digestive problems, but it also entangles them and then results in them drowning. So that's one problem. But in the backdrop of this, climate change is affecting every single whale rather than individuals because well, the changes in temperature results in the abundance of food, like maybe not being in the place where they're supposed to be. So I think this results in even greater problems. And at the same time, they get whacked by ships. So especially, I think ships are not so much a universal problem, but more like local problems, especially in where there are high shipping traffics, especially in where ships and whales meet. So these are the areas that needs to be mitigated. Whereas climate change and plastic is a universal problem that needs to be tackled. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Right, like yeah, just finishing that thought about the boat traffic is especially bad in the North Atlantic. The North Atlantic right whale is the most endangered mammal on the planet. And so, I mean, my God, we're down to a few thousand individuals because they all collide against each other because whales, they don't really sleep, but they kind of slumber, kind of rest. And when they do, they are in the surface. And that's when they get whacked by the ships. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. There are a few more questions about threats, but I'm just going to move to other questions first so that we can diversify this Q&A session a bit. So please bear with me, those who ask those questions. We have another, on a different tag. This question is about, it's more about Singapore and Singaporeans. So how can we get Singaporeans to be interested in the wildlife of other countries, especially since we don't get to see much of the wildlife that the rest of the world has to offer? And linked to this is another question about how do you recommend youths in Singapore to further their interest in marine biology in general or in whale studies specifically? Anyone in the panel, maybe Professor Ng?
Oh,
Starting with you, or anyone else who wants to jump in, yeah.
That's a tough question. Singaporeans travel a lot these days. I think a fair number of them travel around the world to see interesting sights, not just shopping or whatever. And I think you expose them to the fact that there are these wonderful natural treasures in Colombia, in different parts of the world. I think many Singaporeans will be keen to explore. Certainly, South America is one of those places perhaps Singaporeans visit less, and it's something that we should encourage. I think Singaporeans are quite cosmopolitan in that sense. I think, Thai-Ker, you agree. And given the opportunity, given the exposure, given the knowledge that there are these lovely things in Latin America, in South America, I think a fair number of Singaporeans will go there, have a look. And I think one of the good ways to, I suppose, bond the whole planet together is for us to share each other's heritage, both cultural as well as natural heritage, right? I think the whole planet is rather a bit divisive these days, right? Everybody is out against each other, and then they're forgetting that they are sharing one planet together. That's one of the problems with the human race. I think that's something we should encourage, at least between, that's what ambassadors are supposed to do, bring our countries together. And then as far as marine biology and whale research is concerned, well, at the end of the day, I think we encourage all our young biologists, researchers, to pursue their passions. If they love a particular topic, a particular domain, be it whales or whatever, then they should try to take it to its logical conclusion. There are no boundaries. There are Singaporeans all over the planet. I suspect I had one student years ago. She's working in Brazil. The whole family emigrated there. And I think this is an area for collaborative research that we should also explore to allow Singaporean students perhaps to work together with our Colombian friends to see whether they can find some common ground. I think the ambassador is trying to work something together with our side to try to bring the researchers closer together. When we first started, we thought Colombia is too far away. I think the ambassador has convinced me that that's an illusion. We are all connected regardless. I think there are common grounds. We have to find them. And as Mr Thai-Ker also said, you know, this thing about livable cities, for Singapore, for the Netherlands to have a Lee Kuan Yew City Award, is really the first connector. Somewhere along the line, history and fate has decided there's a connection. So, hey, opportunities for the future for the young and the not so young.
Thank you for that. So I have another question here. So this one is again on a different tack. How do you, and this one brings together all the elements that you've been talking about today. How do you think we can leverage more on the intersections between arts and marine sciences? So is the museum or are there any expeditions doing anything in this regard? And can the public get, how can the public be more engaged in such work, not beyond outreach and citizen science? So I think I'm opening this up to the whole panel. So it covers the whole range of experiences here.
I'm going to jump in fast.
Yep,
I just think I live by a motto that is knowledge is power. The more we know, the more we are empowered. But see, my experience has been that I'd like to outreach the wonders of science and the natural world and in general science to all sorts of audiences. So as a journalist and as a science writer and communicator, I've been having to learn what makes you tick. Well, really. So in the end, a lot of it is, as the panelists before have said, is exposing the persons to the interesting side of sciences. What is it, or the animal, or the region, or the research, but doing it from the point of view of more of a narrative storytelling angle, more from the point of view of the senses and the humanity, the humanizing. I mean, I anthropomorphize a lot of the animals. I mean, I've even made comparisons between a little atom nucleus and yeah, giving it like almost like an anthropomorphization. But the bottom line, I think, is to show and open a window and inspire the people to want to go beyond. And that's what we're doing with the secret lives of whales. So we need to really People love to learn. I mean, otherwise, National Geographic and Discovery and the BBC, they will be broke. People love those channels because they are inspired, they learn. I mean, see what Sir David Attenborough has done, what Carl Sagan did, what Cousteau did. So I think there are lots of us that follow those steps, and all you have to do is show them. If you show young children and even adults that the lady that is doing her nails in the beauty parlor, they are interested in learning. We just need to find platforms to do it. And as you said earlier, engage them in citizen science. There are many, many projects.
So I would like to add, before we started this panel, we were discussing about how the acoustic recording of Humpback Whales, Songs of Humpback Whale by Roger Payne was a multi-platinum best-selling album in the 70s. So I think that's an example of how the arts have influenced science and the other way around, and how the studying of the bioacoustic sonars of whales might have led to better scientific technology as well. So at the museum also, we have invited artists to and their classes to come draw some specimens, and a lot of artists have drawn our sperm whales and other marine exhibits around here. So I think this is where the Natural History Museum, as well as the arts, has a direct interface in one form or the other too.
Thanks, Angela and Marcus. We have time for just one more question in this event, but for those of you who have already asked a lot of very interesting questions, not to worry. We will follow up with answers to the questions as best as we can after when we post when we post out this webinar. Okay. So for the last question, this one is really directed at Angela directly. How has your experience following and doing research on whales inspired your writing as a science journalist?
Oh, what a beautiful question. It has inspired me beyond what you can imagine. I mean, being inside a submarine and listening to the whales, for example, it really moves you. And again, it goes back to the senses, to hearing, to touching, to being there. It has inspired me also because I see that lots of people don't have the privilege of knowing, of realizing, hey, this is wonderful. And I am the kind of person that wonders at every little thing, like a child. So I really want to tell this to people, and I keep looking for new platforms to do it. So I talk to my nephews, I talk to my friends, I talk to people in schools, I talk to researchers who are writing or working on one thing, but they are really happy to learn about this other thing. So it has inspired me, and I hope this is just the beginning. I mean, because there is way too much out there, and I really do believe that the making friendships across oceans, across margins, across rivers, across mountains is a big key, because we should be thinking not as a nature, but as within nature, as inside. We're part of nature, and this is something we need to use all our literary or communication weapons to come across, because if we don't take care of the natural world, it's not going to be a nice future for us. So we need to do something about it. We need to join forces.
Thanks very much, Angela. I think I'll hand this. Oh yes, Ambassador Solano has something to add.
Let me make one comment. Behind of here, I have a painting. Please focus in the painting. We are talking is about South-South cooperation. Now, this is the idea that we want to do, right? We are tropical countries, and we find today that with the capacities of Singapore and the capacities of my country, that we can have access to the Antarctic, right? So this is one area. If you see exactly, if you see this painting, it's one tropical guy like you and me in some of the ports, right? They are fishing. That's the thing we want to do. And this gallery, 90% of the painting in this gallery is made by Colombians artists, and the rest 10% is Latin American artists. All of them is in favor of the climate change. And you have the chance to see everything. So this we start to find a way to make a collaboration, Dr. and Mr. Liu Thai-Ker, and I think this tropical countries we have to take care together about the Arctics and the ways how you prove, and there is strong evidence for both ways, how we have to, through the ways, we understand better, and we have to take care of oceans. As I see my duty as ambassador to promote this channel of cooperation. Thank you. This is my last comment about this.
Completely agree.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'll hand it over now to back to Diana.
Thank you, Darren. And thank you to all of our guest speakers and panelists for your answers to the audience. And thank you for accepting our invitation and for sharing so much of your valuable knowledge and experiences with us. We would also like to give a special thank you to the Artitude Galleria and the Li Kongchen Natural History Museum for allowing us to carry out this event in these wonderful venues. And thank you also to you, our audience, for all of your time and insightful questions. Please continue to post them, and we will send them to our whale experts and hopefully post them on the NUS sites shortly after they're answered. Okay, thank you so much. Until next time, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Angela.
Thank you, Angela.